We're now being joined by Brigadier General Buba Marwa, who's retired. He's a presidential, I think you lead the Presidential Advisory Committee for the Elimination of Drug Abuse. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you.
Well, you've seen the statistics there, reeled out. I think it was research done led by the NBS, the National Bureau of Statistics, with support from the UNODC, funded by the European Union. That's the report that was being reeled out there. It would seem now that there's some progress, but it would seem that it's not in every part of the country. And when we look at the people, when you look at the statistics of the people who are actually using drugs between 25 and 39, these are people who will consider adults, they're full adults. Would you say that I don't know whether this is owing to your advocacy amongst younger people or whether or not older people really realize the danger of drug abuse?
Well, as you know, we've just submitted the report. The second committee, which is the Interministerial Committee, is reviewing it, and I believe they will conclude this month. I hope so. And then the government will swing into action. So the implementation of the report itself has not started. So there's no progress yet. What
report precisely is that?
That is the Presidential Advisory Committee for the Elimination of Drug Abuse, which was inaugurated at the end of 2018. We finished and submitted in October last year.
Okay.
And the second committee, which is chaired by the Secretary to the Governor of the Federation, is reviewing it. It sent our report to key stakeholders, and the reports have come in, and I believe this week they will be meeting to finalize. So we hope that after that, the government will finally take a decision on implementing the report and getting to the root of things.
The findings in your report, were they different from what the NBS found?
No. The NBS did a statistical a survey to show the extent of the prevalence. And the numbers, I've seen some of the numbers, but I'll reveal a few more. They are staggering, isn't it? We've heard that 1 in 7 Nigerians use drugs. But if you look at the statistics, for instance, in the Southwest Zone, the prevalence is 22.4%. That's 4.2 million in the Southwest Zone. Then next is the South-South, 16.6%. About 2.2 million Nigerians in the South-South. And go to the Southeast, which is the third in prevalence, 1.55 million Nigerians, 13.8% prevalence. This in the South. And then when you go to the North, the next is the Northeast, which is 13.6% prevalence. 2 million, 2.09 actually, million taking drugs. Then the Northwest. For the most part, people have thought that the Northwest was leading, but actually is number 5 with a prevalence of 12%, 3 million drug users. And the North Central...
3 million?
Yeah.
Well, if you compare the numbers...
Yes, when you compare the numbers, but look at the Northwest.
When you look at the percentage,
right,
it can be a little misleading, don't you
correct, because the Northwest is equivalent in population to the entire Southeast and South-South, you know. And the North Central has 10% prevalence, 1.5 million. It's a terrible, terrible situation, and there's a need to move fast on it. Otherwise, we're almost a nation of drug users.
What kind of drugs are we looking at here? What would you say, we found the highest use of, apart from alcohol and cigarettes and tobacco?
Now, there's 14.3 million from that report, drug users in the country. Of that population, 10.6 are using cannabis. Cannabis is by far the highest, commodity that they are using. And perhaps because it is grown mostly in the South, that accounts for why the prevalence is high in the South. After that are the opioids, which is about 4.6 million also doing opioids. And then cough syrups, 2.4 million.
That is in spite of the ban on codeine.
Yes. The ban has helped, but as you know, when you ban things, they go under. Prices go up, but there's scarcity here.
Oh, that's a breakdown of the statistics there. So what are you recommending precisely? What are you asking the federal government to do in that report to try and stem the tide of drug use in Nigeria?
First, you know, in this business, the government has to have the political will. We are comfortable that the president does have one. Otherwise, he would not have set up this committee. We have recommended that a state of emergency be declared as far as the fight against drug abuse is concerned. And we have named it WADA, War Against Drug Abuse. It should be formally launched under emergency status. There are about 4 thematic areas that we've looked at. First is structural. We discovered that the various agencies that are tasked, the NDLA, which is the lead agency, the police, the customs, NAFDAC, Ministry of Health, and regulators, and so on and so forth, none of them has the necessary convening authority to drive the campaign where others will respect it. So they seem to be all going their separate ways. There's no collaboration, no coordination. That's one of the key things we found out. No MOUs between these bodies. So the first recommendation is the creation of a new agency that will drive, coordinate, and implement the National Drug Response in Nigeria. This will be the National Drug Control Commission, NDCC. It will go through legislation because we want this fight to be sustained even after the president's tenure now. So it will go through legislation, and you have the NDCC. Within its body will be drug demand reduction, drug supply reduction, the implementation of National Drug Control Master Plan. The next one for 2020 to 2024 is about ready now. There will be a drug repository where we'll have all the data on drug matters in the country, arrests, seizures, and so on and so forth.
What can the NDLEA be upgraded to do that function, to carry out that function?
The NDLEA actually will be moved in our recommendation to work in partnership because the NDLEA faces supply reduction. And that's just one aspect. There's a demand reduction, which is an equally strategic aspect, but that doesn't fall within its purview. Then you have the narcotics and controlled drugs, psychotropic substances, which the NAFDAC is handling. We are going to bring that under this umbrella. So there is one body that coordinates and has the convening authority to drive the whole campaign. So that's the first thematic area. Then the second is to look closely at the supply reduction strategies and how we should drive it. If you don't have drugs, there will be no drug abuse. So we have to face imports, exports, production, manufacture, cultivation, trafficking, use. That's the purview of drug supply reduction. And law enforcement. We have to look at some of the laws need to be reviewed, especially the Pharmacists Council bill, which we hope the president will soon sign. Very critical. So that's one aspect. And then you go to the demand reduction. That's a key element today. First, the drug users themselves. If we have 14.3 million drug users within the ages of 15 and 64, it means there's over 180 million that are not yet using drugs. We have to face that pari passu with those who are using drugs. Otherwise, it's like dropping into a basket. The water will just seep through. If you're only dealing with the drug users and you don't prevent others from getting in, the cycle continues. So we have to face the prevention itself, and the strategies we recommended first is to get the democratic experiment right. Most of the office holders we discovered over the years, things are getting better now, but over the years, they were not elected by the people. They were fraudulently elected using their own money. So if I'm elected not by the people, but fraudulently, why do I care about the people? I will just do my thing, wait for the next election, spend the money, and come back to office. So they don't care. Then you have prevalence of poverty. So poverty has to be tackled by the government. Fortunately, we've had the president, and we're happy that he's raising 100 million out of poverty over the next 10 years, himself and the subsequent government. So poverty, unemployment, these are the key things that play a very important role that have to be tackled as far as prevention is concerned. Then the availability of drugs. We have to make sure that the drugs are out of the way in the demand reduction sector, and then advocacy. Advocacy and publicity is paramount, and these things have to start from the family. Because one of the things we are facing in the country on drug abuse is destruction of families. Communities have to work, traditional rulers have to work, religious institutions, people respect them, they have to work in this advocacy business. It's very important. And the government has a very critical role to play, especially in terms of the drug users themselves. You look at the country with a population of 200 million, we have just 11 model rehab centers and a total of about 31 in the whole country. So they are scarce. So you are taking drugs, you know it's bad, you need help, but nowhere to go. That's why you had that prevalence of these places where they shackled the faith-based centers. So the rehab centers, the treatment of those and aftercare. So government has a very important role down to local government levels. And if you look at it, some of the states, because our committee went around states also, met stakeholders and stuff, entire states, you find there's a single rehabilitation center.
Not one single rehabilitation.
In some of them, yes.
Just
so
wondering,
these are the issues.
You went around the states. Did you also go outside of the country to see countries that perhaps had the problem before and how they've managed them?
We did.
Which countries did you go to?
I went to India personally, visited UAE, United States. The United States was far-reaching because we visited the executive office of the president, where the drug SARS office is, the National Office for Drug Control Policy. We started with the FBI, visited their institutions and how they did stuff. We visited the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration. So we had solid meetings. The International Narcotics Department at the State Department, we also visited. Global Threats, we also visited at the Pentagon. We had a very solid visit to learn how they have coped. And as you know, the DEA is working very closely with us here in Nigeria. Then the National Crime Agency in the UK, we also paid a visit to them. And as I mentioned, in India, the Narcotics Control Board. So we picked out how they were tackling their own issues and also buttressed them with our own local approach to it. The committee was very robust, as you know. The MDAs were part of it, professionals were part of it, academia were part of it, regulatory agencies were part of it, and of course we had the support of Her Excellency, the First Lady herself. She worked very hard in the committee, and Her Excellency Mr. Shimbanjo. So we went to town, we met all the key stakeholders and went down to states, local government and communities. And now that I mentioned the Drug Control Commission at the national level, this will be replicated at the state, local government, and community levels. Every community must be sensitized and must set up its own committee. This is a serious crisis. The drug control scourge in Nigeria, unless it is tackled, we are finished. If you look at all whether it's Boko Haram, banditry, kidnapping, they all use drugs. Let me tell you, this was last week. Auno, near Maiduguri. I listened to a report directly with somebody living in Ono. He mentioned that one of the bosses with a woman, she was being burnt alive inside. She threw her child out so that at least the child will survive. The insurgents picked the child and flung him back into the bus. What kind of depravity could that be unless somebody was completely out of his senses? So this is the root cause of most of our problems, including security, and must be tackled.
Let's quickly go to Lagos now and take some questions from my colleagues.
Well, Jonah, this is a huge problem indeed, and the country really needs to do all we can to ensure we tackle it. And interesting that your committee is also working on this. But you mentioned an equally important component, which is the influence. Because one of the former NDLA bosses, they tell us that almost 90, if not more than 90% of the crime perpetrated in this country, many of them are usually under the influence. How is this committee, or what is the recommendation regarding the role the police has got to play? Because just last week, there were reports that I think the police had arrested some persons who were supplying the insurgents drugs, the drug suppliers. So how is the police going to be integrated in this?
The lead agency actually is the NDLEA, but they lead all the other agencies, including the police. The only thing is that there's an adjustment that will be made as far as the police is concerned. We will need to tinker with the law because there's an Indian Hemp Act which still persists, where the police is allowed to deal with those arrested with this commodity, selling it, trafficking, and so on, and prosecute them. Equally, if you look at it at the wider periphery, the police is entitled to prosecute criminals. And when you sell and traffic drugs, it's criminal. But because we want things to be codified under one umbrella, and it's the NDLA that has this charge, some little tinkering will be done. That said, the police, NAFDAC, customs, and other security agencies, they are fully involved in this fight. It's a total war that must be declared. Finally, there's need for more capacity building in terms of these agencies and funding. They need better logistics, they need better welfare, they need training, and they need, of course, more discipline.
All right, we'll come back to you when we return from this break and get some more perspectives. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. Let's get back to the general on this. So I know that, NDLA initially too, I don't know what it is now, they used to say that Nigeria used to be a transit point. But these days, with this kind of reports, and from your findings, do you find that, are we now a destination point for some of this cartel? What did you find in your committee's report?
Yeah, just before that, rounding up the matter of the police, the NDLA also does not have sufficient manpower for raids and interdictions. So this is one critical role that the police in several countries, ours inclusive, must play to support and supplement the manpower in raids. When they have to raid, they have to move with strength to deal with some of these traffickers. And of course, the whole issue of funding, very critical. Now, back to your question. Yes, up to perhaps 2013 or so, we used to be a transit. But now we are a full user. You've seen it, 14.3. This is more than twice the global average, which is 5.6% prevalence. So we're actually now, and we've discovered, we are user nation. 10 million smoking cannabis. It's horrible. But with the political will of the government, I believe, once the state of emergency is declared and the recommendations are implemented, backed by proper funding at all levels, and with the total mobilization, because the whole country must mobilize now, communities, traditional institutions, religious leaders, families, everybody has to be up because we are all going to be dragged down unless we come up and deal with this matter. And finally, the matter of education, schools. In our work, we recommended that we have to now start from primary school to put in the curriculum the drug abuse matter. Primary, secondary, and tertiary. That means we have to build capacity also of teachers. The UNODC has been doing the Unplugged program, and now we want it to be completely adopted in all our schools.
Now, General, you talked about, well, that response you just gave now leads me to this question, because I was going to ask you what your committee's recommendations are about solving the problem. Now that you mentioned that, that's taken and it's a given. However, you also talked about poverty and unemployment as major root causes. What are the components of your committee's recommendation to tackle this? Because, I mean, one would expect that once we're able to take out the problems, the root causes, the problem will be greatly solved.
The issue of poverty and unemployment rests with the federal government at this point, and we've given that in our recommendations. They have to bring the appropriate macroeconomic policies, and I believe the government is doing it already. The president has indicated 100 million Nigerians are going to be taken out of poverty. It's very critical. We have to remember that when you treat drug addicts, it's not enough. You also have to look at the aftercare. If you go back to Lagos, when I used to serve with the state government, we had thousands of street urchins. 99% of them were on drugs. They used to call them area boys and girls. At the time, the NDLA under Jemba, they were properly funded. They were very hard. We supported them, and so the supply angle, they were taking care of it. So we built the rehab for the area boys, treated them, rehabilitated them, and gave them skills. We gave them skills, driving, civil service work, farm, animal husbandry, and so on, bakery and stuff. We also set them up with some funding so that when they go, they have something to do to be useful members of society. So that has to be part of the recommendations. So in answer to your question, those key ingredients of poverty and jobs have to be faced by government.
Now, seeing the effects that drug abuse has on security, I mean, we see from time to time when arrests are made, the agencies always get stashes of, different drugs at the den of some of us criminals. Also, the effect on mental health. I could go on and on. Now, talking about that drug abuse report which you submitted to the government, did you give a time frame for the implementation? Because it sounds as though this is some time in the future. So how soon should we be expecting the implementation?
I will be surprised if the implementation does not start in another month. I will be surprised. But this speaking, I know the government has so many things in front of it to deal with. But as far as the drug abuse is concerned, we have submitted our report in October. And I know the president has a political will. And the other committee is reviewing it. It's almost concluded. I know they are meeting this week to finalize. And I know that as soon as they submit the report to the president, the implementation will begin.
Okay, let me ask you this. What about those who say, why are we so disturbed about psychoactive substances? After all, alcohol and tobacco are also drugs.
Yes, because they are recreational. But we also made some recommendations on those ones. For instance, we recommended they should cut out the adverts for some of these commodities, like alcohol, to discourage its use. But as I said, they are recreational, and you really cannot say zero alcohol. People have the right But when you consume more than is required, and perhaps you are caught driving drunk, there's a penalty. So these penalties also have to be enforced.
Okay.
So it's critical.
Only recently, controversy broke when the Ondo State government was talking about growing cannabis for export as a source of foreign exchange earning. And there are those who have now come up to say that perhaps we should take a second look at how we, have handled cannabis especially with changing trends in terms of how the drug is being regarded in other countries. What's your take on that?
Now, after the visit of the governor, and I'm sure he has his own reasons for visiting Thailand and so, in connection with raising revenue for Ondo, and I sympathize, having been in that seat before. There is a need for funds for projects, but this is the wrong way. And I think I responded at that time pretty quickly that not in Nigeria, from our own findings.
Why not?
We've researched this. In fact, I've visited, the committee in our visit to the US, visited the National Institute for Drug Abuse, and we challenged them. You have all these things that come out. And that's the highest research body in the United States on drug abuse matters. And they were very clear. They were very clear that that's not the way to go. And they brought statistics. In those states, for instance, where cannabis have been legalized, there's 3 times more admissions in hospital from drug-related incidents and crime. Secondly, when you take cannabis, already it's a problem. In Nigeria, we're dealing with it, and you say, no, let's legalize it. That 10 million will, before you know it, grow to 50 million. So there are issues that are more complicated. What we recommended to the governor is for him to find other ways to raise funds, but not through these means where our own use will be endangered. What's the prevalence in Lagos? 33%. Lagos State has a prevalence of drug use of 33%. Majority of that is cannabis.
You don't think that regulation will serve better than total blackout?
Definitely not, because it's not something that is good. If it's something good that helps, yes, by all means. But already we know this thing affects the brain. It has a health consequence. You completely get out of your mind with the use, and you get stuck with it. It's something to avoid.
Well, it's a fine place to leave it. We have to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Brigadier General Buba Marwa, retired, leads the Presidential Advisory Committee for the Elimination of Drug Abuse. Thank you again for coming on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you.
The program will continue shortly with another perspective and another matter. Please stay with us.